Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger have moved to further deepen their political, security and economic bond. Coming together under the Alliance of the Sahel States, the three countries are now creating their own bank, the Confederal Bank for Investment and Development. This week on the program, we assess how far the Sahelian states have come since they kicked out France and broke away from the regional bloc ECOWAS. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Before we dive into the discussion, here is a quick look at some of the key milestones that shaped the Alliance of the Sahel States since its formation. On September the 16th, 2023, Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger signed the Liptako-Guma Charter, forming the Alliance of the Sahel States, also known as the Sahel Troika. In January this year, Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger officially withdrew from the regional economic bloc ECOWAS after rejecting a 6-month extension period offered by the bloc. The decision followed months of strained relations between the three states and ECOWAS. And earlier this year, the alliance introduced a new biometric passport to ease travel and residency across the three states. By May, the creation of the Confederal Bank for Investment and Development was approved. Capitalized at nearly $900 million, the bank aims to foster regional economic growth and stability. With that background, let's now bring in our expert panel of guests to assess how far these countries have come since they kicked out France and ditched ECOWAS. Joining me from Accra in Ghana, Blaise Tulo, member of the Socialist Movement of Ghana. From Bamako via Zoom, Modibo Mao Makalo, a Malian economist. And in London, also via Zoom, Paul Melly, Associate Fellow, Africa Programme, Chatham House. A very warm welcome to you all, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us in this discussion. Let me start off with you, Modibo, here, because the Alliance of the Sahel States is in the process of establishing their own bank, the Confederal Bank for Investment and Development. In which way will this be a game changer if it actually takes off?
ECOWAS used to have a development and investment bank. So now that they are not member of ECOWAS anymore, the three states, namely Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, have decided to create a Confederal Investment Bank for Development. This is in order to really have an autonomous financing of critical infrastructure, and also to make sure that development projects are financed within the mid and long term. Because as of now, in the three states, you only have commercial banks, that have a high interest rate and short-term durations of loans. So they need really long-term loans and also at favorable rates. And also you would notice that these are three countries that are very dependent on foreign trade, right. Imports, meaning goods and services they buy from outside, and also exports. So I think this can be a game changer, really, to make sure, because the capital would be about $1 billion for this investment bank in order to finance and also promote trade between these three countries, because they are landlocked countries and also they are Sahelian countries, meaning they are also semi-deserted.
So I want to get all your view on exactly how you think the three countries have fared on. Blaise, to you here. How do you think the three countries have fared since they cut ties with France and broke away from ECOWAS? Particularly, let's talk about the security situation.
Well, there's been enormous progress since they cut ties with ECOWAS and then France. I mean, I think that the main point to make is about sovereignty and self-determination. And it has a history. You will remember in the 1960s that Guinea, Mali, and Ghana formed a confederation that was supposed to become the beginning of the unity of the African continent, which is actually a necessary condition for the development of the African continent. So this has been a major political struggle on the continent. How can we unify our continent to build up a certain economic program to advance the wishes and aspirations of the African people. Of course, after the 1966 coup, that project of African unity was truncated. And ever since, our people have been battling and struggling for this major political advancement, which is the unity of the African continent. So the formation of the AES and the breakaway from ECOWAS is a major political advancement in the Sahel. First of all, there's been massive economic changes ever since the breakaway. First of all, Niger, prior to the coup d'etats, ranked one of the poorest countries on the continent. Today, just last year, there were indications that Niger had become one of the fastest growing economies in the region. So this is a major advancement after the breakaway from ECOWAS. There are still glaring security challenges, but it is very clear right now that, look, there's a certain self-determination, there's a certain purpose, there's a certain clarity that the Sahel, and driven by these three leaders, are forging a certain path that is revealing massive improvement in the lives of the working people of the Sahel.
Let me rope in Paul here, because Paul, you're watching from London. What's been your take on the developments that have taken place in the three countries since they broke away from ECOWAS?
I think we have to separate the, if you like, the political agenda and the whole question of these three Sahelian countries wanting to pursue, if you like, a very strong Pan-Africanist, sovereignist political agenda from the economic questions and the development questions, because there's a very practical development challenge that faces all three Sahel countries, which is that the sort of things that they produce, the sort of goods they produce, the sort of products that they export are products that in part go to the international market, but they're also products that have a market in Western Africa. So, for example, particularly with livestock, the Sahel countries are very big exporters of livestock to the large concentrations of population on the West African coast. And then in return, the Sahel countries actually have depended very heavily on other goods that they import from the coastal countries. And so there was a natural complementarity between the coastal countries and the landlocked Sahelian countries. And also many Sahelian people have migrated to work in the coastal states. There are estimates that there may be something between 3 and 5 million Burkina, for example, living in Côte d'Ivoire. So the challenge now that these countries are in two separate blocks,
right,
is how to maintain those economic relationships while obviously they're pursuing different political paths. And the question, that's something that's been negotiated really over the last few months and will continue to be negotiated over the months ahead. We don't really yet know what's going to come out of that, but it's interesting, and right, I think this is a key final point, that the Sahel countries have not chosen to leave the CFA franc currency bloc, which has 8 member countries in West Africa, some on the coast and some in the Sahel. They've chosen to stay in that bloc, which in some ways is one of the strongest structures of economic integration across West Africa. Right.
So let's get some clarity on that. Modibo, who exactly are the three countries trading with? Let's get your that whole situation of the economic relations right now. How has leaving ECOWAS impacted trade and investment among these three countries?
As Paul said, mainly if you look at the trade balance of Mali, Mali trades mainly with Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire. Burkina trades mainly with Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana. Only Niger will be greatly affected because Niger trades mainly with Benin and also Nigeria being the powerhouse in West Africa. But this is mostly informal trade. I think it would not have a big effect except on the free movement of people and also of investment. West African travel a lot, and as it's been said, Sahelian countries mainly travel to the coastal countries to do business and also to have a better living standards. And this is also they are also part of the business sector in these countries where they go and often become citizens. But I think there should be gateways between Alliance of Sahelian States and ECOWAS. So basically, they would have to work together. Otherwise, I don't see nobody's going to move out of West Africa, and the trade will continue, and free movement of people will continue. And this has to be really taken into account in the negotiations.
Paul, your take on how it has been impacted, how the three countries have been impacted economically, particularly after cutting off ties with France?
On the economic side, the crucial link with France is the fact that the CFA franc currency that I mentioned is pegged to the euro. And it is the French Treasury, the French government, the Bank of France that guarantees that currency peg. Now, there's a lot of discussion in West Africa over whether that arrangement should be changed, but that's not a discussion that's limited to the Sahel countries. It's something that's being discussed in Senegal, in Côte d'Ivoire, in all 8 member states. And it may be that eventually the CFA franc is either replaced or the arrangement is changed. But for the moment, right. That's the critical connection to France, and that remains in place. Basically, the French government has simply said that it's really up to all 8 West African countries, including the 3 Sahel countries, to decide how they want that to evolve, and France will fit with it. So in a sense, the economic relation with France is quieter. And in terms of the exports, of course, there's been a lot of attention about Niger's uranium exports to France, which have been stopped. But the gold exports from Mali and Burkina, the companies that are producing the gold are not French. They're British, Canadian, Australian, South African, Russian. So in a sense, the economic connection to France is the political break with France is having rather less economic impacts than one might have feared, say, a year or 2 back.
Blaise, your take on what has been the impact of their departure, though, for ECOWAS, both politically and economically?
Politically, I mean, since the creation of the ECOWAS, which was supposed to advance the economic integration of the region, we have seen that it hasn't lived up to its expectation. Our economies within the region are not really integrated. It's very difficult to move in and out of the region, and economic trade is very low. And so it's very clear that ECOWAS has not lived up to its expectation. And that is why there has been massive commendation to the Sahel for breaking out of ECOWAS. And when ECOWAS made several attempts to invade Niger, you could see the mass of our people that rose up against ECOWAS. I mean, the Nigerian parliament completely voted against any advancement of military into Niger. So this is a clear indication that ECOWAS have not lived up to its expectation. There are repercussions. I think that there's been several attempts to get back, especially after John Dramani Mahama was elected in Ghana, to ensure that the AES, the Sahelian countries, gets back into ECOWAS. But I think that they have given a clear indication that getting back to ECOWAS is not an option that is on the table.
Right.
The option that is on the table is to advance their economic integration and so forth.
Modibo, and that brings us to an interesting question on resource allocation. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have vast resources: gold, uranium, lithium, among others. So to what extent is their newfound sovereignty enabling them and their citizens to benefit from these resources?
If you put the gold produced by Mali and Burkina together, This is more than what Ghana produces, and Ghana is the first producer of gold. As you see, Sahelian countries and most African countries are not benefiting from the natural resources because of the structure of the mining sector, which is mainly dominated by multinationals. And I think the contracts themselves are not very equitable and very fair. And I think you would see that one of the first reforms made by all three governments was reforming the mining sector, because it's a predominant sector within the economy. Basically, there are not enough public resources that are deriving from the mining sector, which is an export sector. And even though there's also problems with the governance of the mining sector, because within the three Sahelian countries, it's even difficult to do to account for the real production of the mining sector. So if you don't know the real production, you don't know the real revenues, and of course this will impact on a negative side public expenditures. But if I may shortly get back to the CFA franc, there is a treaty that was signed between France and the 8 African countries that share the CFA franc. And this was modified on December 21st, 2019. So there is no longer a current account of the Central Bank of West African States in the French Treasury, even though French still guarantees the CFA, in that you can translate CFA francs without limit into euros, but this still has to have the backing of the European Parliament.
Right. So, Blaise, from where you are, though, what kind of specific changes are you seeing, particularly with the use of natural resources?
Oh, yes. I mean, there's been enormous changes, especially that now there's been different trade partners that are expressing interest in the Sahel. We know very well that China has become a very key trading partner, and they are building important bridges, and that is the difference. There's a huge difference between economic growth and then economic development. What we are seeing now is a deliberate attempt to invest in projects that are tangible and that affects real people. So we see that there's been enormous, especially in Burkina Faso, massive construction of schools and hospitals that is leveraged from all the renegotiated mines that the new regime has undertaken. In Mali, we know that there's been massive investment in agriculture to assure that there's self-sufficiency and that they can feed the population. In Niger as well, we know that there's massive investment in the construction of bridges, which are also leverages from the renegotiated uranium settlement. There's now stability in electricity in Niger after a very long time of power outages and so forth. So these are some of the concrete changes that have come up and that are impacting real lives in the Sahel.
All right, gentlemen, we are going to take a short break there. And when we return, we'll take a closer look at the challenges facing these nations and ask, what does the future hold for the Troika as it forges its own path? To stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Let's now continue with this discussion. Still with me, Blaise Tulo, Modibo Mao Makalo, and Paul Melly. Let's now look at the progress made and the challenges that lie ahead for the Troika. Modibo, the AES has announced recently plans to deploy a joint force of 5,000 troops to counter the growing threat of terrorism in that region. What progress has the AES made, though, in addressing the security situation in the Sahel?
Tremendous progress, because as you know, Mali was occupied by insurgents in large part, even though United States troops were here, 15,000 troops were here. the insurgency got worse while they were still here, and then even spread to Burkina Faso and then Niger. But since the creation of AES, now they are being able to share information and to mutualize also, their forces, and also the fact that they have joint operations makes it much easier, to at least counter terrorism. I think this is one of the things that was also that we didn't like with ECOWAS, because
Right.
ECOWAS was not there to help on these issues.
Paul, is there any evidence, or is there much evidence that the security situation in the AES has improved or worsened since the pivot away from ECOWAS?
Many of the outside organizations that were present in the region before are not currently on the ground. So we don't, it's quite hard to get an exact picture of what's happening. These are huge countries, and particularly Mali and Niger. The extent of the territory is very, very large, and the numbers of soldiers concerned, even with their expanding armies, are relatively small when spread over those huge territories. And there are large areas where there's very little going on at all. And that's to say, we don't really know exactly what is happening in what area or who controls it, simply because of the scale of the geographies, if you like.
Right.
And we've also seen it, interestingly, if you look back to when there was the structure of the G5 Sahel, which was these three countries plus Chad and Mauritania, at that stage there was an attempt to develop a joint force, but there are all sorts of practical problems, practical issues to be addressed. For example, one of the problems that happened with the G5 Sahel joint force was when they did an exercise,
Right.
the soldiers found that they were using different radio systems. Their military radio systems weren't compatible, so they couldn't actually talk to each other. So just the practical process of building up collaboration is something that takes time. It's not an easy process.
Right. So, Blaise, you've talked a lot about the positives that have happened in these three countries since they broke away from ECOWAS and France. And some of the interesting issues that have come up include issues like elimination of mobile roaming fees, development of a joint passport, implementation of a unified 0.5% customs duty on imports from non-member countries. Is this breakaway, though, likely to set a precedent for other countries to chart their own path?
I am very much inspired by the processes that is unfolding in the Sahel, and my hope and aspiration is that we'll do everything we can to defend the gains that are being made in the Sahel. Most of the most important news that we are getting is that when are they going to return back to democratic rule? I mean, democracy, as we know it, is meant to elevate and advance the wishes and aspirations of the working people. And if what is unfolding in the Sahel is doing exactly that, it is our responsibility to defend it. Ours is not to be talking about the challenges. There are challenges everywhere. Most of the experiments that is happening everywhere in the world has got its own challenges. The point, however, is that how do we ensure that the leaders of these three countries remain determined, they remain resolute, and that they can continue to advance the wishes and aspirations of the Sahelian people. Is it possible for a country like Senegal to join? That would be very amazing. And our hope is for us to expand the federation. We actually need to make it a federation to make it much stronger and to express the political wish of our people.
So I want to get your final comments, and let me start with you, Blaise. Looking ahead, what does the future look like for these three countries? Can this breakaway path succeed?
Our hope and aspiration is that they will continue to remain united. They will continue to set up the structures that are necessary to advance them to the next stage. You know, it is very important. This is a major, important and political advancement in the region. We hope that they don't get, I hope that they don't get back to ECOWAS. I don't think that ECOWAS has the right political framework to advance the people's wishes. I hope that they can continue to construct this important bank, set up important investment and trade among themselves. We hope that many more countries in the region can identify themselves and join this alliance and make it stronger, that will project the overall unity of the African continent. We cannot continue to remain the base of imperial forces. We can't continue to remain a region where imperialism will continue to plunder our resources. I think this is a time for us to construct our own process. It is our time for us to extract and exploit our own resources for the betterment of our people. And then we shouldn't allow any Western forces, any imperial forces to subvert the gains that have been made so far in the Sahel. Our hope is that it will expand, it will continue to be resolute, and it will forge its own path that expresses the wishes and aspirations of the working people of our region.
Right. Paul, your take, what does the future look like for these Sahelian countries?
As Modibo said, there are still significant security issues to be addressed in terms of the security situation in many regions of the Sahel is still very difficult, and most people live from rural livelihoods. Although mining is important, most people actually need to be able to grow their crops, herd their animals, and that requires a degree of security in rural areas. So there's a big security challenge, first of all, facing them. And then a second agenda issue really is to kind of complete the negotiation with ECOWAS over a new understanding, a new framework for relations between these three landlocked Sahel countries and the coastal countries, because West Africa is a region, as has been said, where people move around a lot, and people often have families on different sides of the border. Many people have the citizenship of one country, having previously lived in another one, and there's a huge amount of informal economic activity. So whatever the governments, whatever the two blocs decide, in practice, many West Africans are going to be moving back and forth across the borders. Huge volumes of goods will be moving as well. So they need to get that sort of framework so that there's a stability framework, if you like, for what you might call the near medium term. So that, say, the next 3 to 5 years, so that people's everyday lives and their trade and foreign investment can continue.
Right, so Modibo, you have the final word.
I think the future will look good. I think because we have to think midterm and long term. The fight against insecurity and terrorism will be, and also smuggling and all of these counter border trade traffics also. We need to really look at that, because these are there are also vast geopolitical and also economical interests at stake, and also that they're given the various arms for for participating in global trade, regional chains, economic chains, and also the global trade, because I think we have all kinds of economic advantages, but we need to do some structural transformation on the economic side, meaning we should leave less value-added sectors to go to more value-added sectors. And I think with a country like China, which is the first commercial partner of Africa, this would be possible, because delocalization and also trade issues and trade also cooperation and various treaties that we can undertake on a win-win situation. I think we can work with new partners now.
All right, gentlemen, thank you all very much for your insights there. And that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to our guests, Blaise Tulo, member of the Socialist Movement of Ghana, Modibo Mao Makalo, a Malian economist, and Paul Melly, Associate Fellow, Africa Program, Chatham House. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation through our social media platforms on Facebook and X, and you can watch these and other editions of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. Do join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Nairobi, until next time, it's bye-bye.